So, hi everyone, and welcome to our Empathy Effects webinar. I'm Sarah, I'm Content Activation Lead at Humanate, and today I'm joined here by Jolien and Delphine, Director and Global Client Partner at Humanate, and both are really experts in helping brands step into the world of their consumers and building real consumer empathy. So over the next 45 minutes, we will explore why empathy has become such a critical capability today for brands, how it's shaping brand decisions, and also what leading organizations are doing to build consumer empathy. And we will bring all of that to life through brand examples and real client cases. Now, throughout the session, also feel free to share your thoughts and reactions in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. And if any questions come up along the way, you can also drop them in the Q&A tab at any time. You can also upvote each other's questions so that the most relevant ones, they surface at the top. Now we'll try to answer as many questions during the session or via chat or during the Q&A at the end. And finally, also don't forget about the emojis. So feel free to use them to react, to agree, or to simply show what's resonating with you during this session. So let's dive right in. Now, in 2024, dating app Bumble, they launched a campaign with one confident line. You know full well a vow of celibacy is not the answer. The reactions were immediate. People were in shock, they were in disbelief, and many called it tone deaf. So what happened there? Well, Bumble, they tried to tap into the modern frustrations with dating. But they started from their own assumptions that sex is just part of a healthy dating journey, while for many people, that isn't the case. So they reduced something deeply personal and also very complex to a very simple answer. And when you oversimplify people, you stop connecting with them. But Bumble is not the only brand that stumbles. So in April 2023, Bud Light, they partnered with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. And in a video on her Instagram account, she showed a can of Bud Light with her face on it. It was just a small gesture from the brand to celebrate her 365 days of womanhood, and it was part of a move towards more inclusive representation. Now, what happened? Sales dropped by nearly 30% compared to the previous year. By mid-2023, Bud Light lost its position as America's number one selling beer, and the financial impact was estimated at around $1.4 billion in lost sales. So, what went wrong there? Well, the people that are shaping the brand and the people really drinking the brand were living in completely different worlds. So, the brand team, they were living in a more urban, progressive environment. And for them, this campaign made perfect sense. But for a large part of their audience that lived in this more rural, traditional context, it didn't. They didn't see themselves reflected in it, and it also didn't really feel like them. So the brand was completely out of touch with its target audience. And that gap turned a rather small campaign into a major backlash. And this disconnect doesn't only show up in campaigns, it also shows up in who we see and who we don't see. So let's have a look.
I don't feel like I'm spoken to very often. You know, I watch television, go to the cinema more than anything else now, and I certainly don't see any advertising that's largely aimed at me. I feel it's always aimed at a younger audience, and probably an audience that probably hasn't got as much money as me. Um, and if there is an advert aimed at me, like a cruise advert, it's always some awfully attractive couple walking on a sandy beach dressed in white linen, pointing at a cruise ship. And it's just so stereotypical and so bland and so drab that it washes over me. But they don't advertise to me in a way that excites me in my stage of life either.
So this clip shows us something simple but very powerful. I don't feel like I'm spoken to very often. And actually, he's not alone. 57% of people older than 50, they feel undervalued or even ignored by brands. And this is strange because if you think about it, the 50 plus population will account for 60% of global spending power by 2050. But to many marketeers, they seem almost invisible, and only 5 to 10% of marketing budgets are focused on reaching them. So, what's going on there? Well, the people that are shaping brands don't live the lives of the people that they're trying to reach. They don't really step into the world of silvers. And when you don't talk to people and you don't see them, they also quietly disappear from your thinking. And that distance can grow even further. If you think about this, the average marketeer is 25 to 35 years old, and the average advertiser is even younger, which makes it even harder to step into the shoes of silvers. And as a result, millions of people feel unseen, and this results in a blind spot worth trillions of euros. And sometimes the problem isn't really who we don't see, but it's rather what you don't see changing. Now, for years, Gucci was one of the most desired luxury brands in China. It was a clear symbol of status and success. But that started to change. So sales slowed down and the brand really began to lose relevance among Gen Z. And Kering, and that's the parent company behind Gucci, they took its hardest hit since the financial crisis. So what happened there? Well, culture moved, but the brands didn't. And we saw that young consumers are turning more and more to these high quality but lower priced alternatives. And this is a shift that is known as pink tea. So for them, status is no longer about showing what you have, but more showing who you are, showing your identity. But Gucci, they really kept speaking that old language of logo, status, and visibility. So they really didn't sense what was changing, and they also didn't step into this new world. So over time, the brand lost its place in people's lives. So for brands today, it's easier than ever to make mistakes. And we see that even the most well-resourced brands like Bumble, like Bud Light, etc., they stumble today. And what lies at the heart of these missteps is not a data problem or not a strategy gap, but it's really something much more fundamental and human. It's a lack of empathy. So let's start by defining what empathy really is. So it's the ability to really step into someone else's shoes, to understand and feel the world as they experience it. But today we see that this capacity is under pressure. Across society, there are growing signals that people feel less heard, less seen, and less understood. And recent research even shows that people rate AI responses as more empathetic than those of human experts. So something is really wrong, and it's a systemic issue. Our system is broken. Now, our colleagues from Space Doctors, that's our cultural strategy partner, they identified two causes for our empathy problem, and that's empathy fatigue and an empathy deficit. Now, let's first start with fatigue and dive into that one. Just think about how you start your day. You open your phone and you're just bombarded with information. In fact, the average person receives more than 150 notifications each day. You have Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, news flashes about war and climate crisis. It's just one thing after the other. And at first, you still feel something, but over time, it simply becomes too much. And this fatigue turns into numbness. And we also see that people are tuning out. Around 40% say that they actively avoid the news because it feels too emotionally draining. And it's not because they don't care, but it's really because they can't carry it all. But that doesn't mean that we stop feeling altogether. I assume many people have heard about Punch. It was a video that recently started to circulate of this abandoned little monkey that was dragging a plush toy behind him. And within hours, millions of people had seen it. People were sharing it, they were commenting on it, and you could just feel that wave of emotion happening. And for a moment, that little monkey had the intention of the entire world. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, it also faded again. And it was not because people didn't care, but simply because something else took its place. And that's really what empathy fatigue looks like. It's not that we don't feel, but we just can't carry it all. So we become a bit more selective when we lean in and when we tune out. So we still feel, but just not long enough to really put things in motion. And then there's also this second force at play, the empathy deficit. So in this fast digital world, we interact more often with each other, more than ever even, but often more on a superficial level. We never really take the time to pause, to truly listen, and to step into someone else's world. And over time, that also weakens our ability to relate and to connect with each other. And a study from the University of Michigan even mentions that there's a 40% decrease in overall empathy scores among college students if you compare those with the cohorts from 20 to 30 years earlier. And it's also something that we see appearing in the way people are dating. There are endless profiles, but we just take a few seconds per decision. We swipe left, we swipe right. And as one of our Gen Z research participants told us, we're just throwing out lines. And this really diminishes the value of being in a good relationship. But of course, this also goes beyond dating. We see the same shift happening in everyday communication. A growing number of Gen Z actually avoids having phone calls. And it's not because they prefer texting, but because having this real time conversation really feels hard for them. They can't use AI to see what they can say next or to get some inspiration. No, it's just two people on the phone having a direct conversation in real time. And for many of them, that feels highly uncomfortable. So we're kind of caught in this tension. On one side, we feel too much to keep connecting. And on the other side, we don't connect deeply enough. So together, these forces create some distance. It creates distance between people, but also between brands and the people they want to serve.
So let's make this very concrete. When was the last time that you truly connected with a consumer? And no, not through dashboards, consumer quotes, or a report, but in their world, seeing what they see and feeling what they feel. Don't hesitate to post your answer in the chat. There are no wrong answers. Don't be shy. Um, See, too long. Uh, Indeed. I guess that's an answer for many of you because for most organizations, that moment is actually quite rare. Research shows that at best it's twice a year. And also, we know that people suffer from social desirability. So, if we're really honest with ourselves, probably it's even less than that. But it wasn't always like this. So, in the past, we had merchants, they interacted directly with the people. They saw them, they spoke to them, and they understood them in their context. And that was the essence of marketing. But today we are working in large office buildings, often miles away from real consumers, and so much of that connection that is mediated through screens and through data. And yes, of course, those tools are powerful, they are needed, but they also create a distance. And AI, that has only made things worse, actually, because it gives us the illusion that we know everything, but in fact, we understand nothing and we are flooded with data. We have our dashboards, our segmentations, behavioral tracking, but all of that data is fragmented and it's super rational and it's also often stripped from context. So, do you really know your consumer? And not just what they click, but how they live, what they feel, and what drives their decisions. So, for many organizations, that deeper understanding is missing. And you can also not rely on your own experience to bridge that gap because there's a simple truth. You are not your consumer. You probably all heard that line before, but it's true. There's an Australian study that showed that 41% of Sydney agency people, they live in the city or inner city even, compared to just 4% of the general public living there. So yes, you might think, these consumers, they live in a similar way like I do. But in reality, many of them live very different lives. And the more distance there is, the easier it becomes to get it wrong. So think about those examples that Sarah shared earlier. Think about Bumble, Bud Light, and Gucci. And it's exactly why market research exists, right? To bridge that gap, to bring decision makers closer to the people that they serve, to the culture that they move in. But if we're really honest for a moment, how close does it really bring you? We don't like the data. Most organizations don't like the data, but we've done the research, we have our segmentations, we've built our persona. You know what the people do, you know what they buy. You might even know what they click. And you're surrounded by data and by information. But again, it's fragmented, it's often disconnected and stripped from context. So instead of bringing you closer, it can actually also keep you at a distance. You're data rich, but you're often still searching for real and foundational understanding of people and the culture that they move in. And even when you have those insights, the question now becomes, is that really enough? And the short answer is no, it's not enough. Because yes, insights inform, but it's the empathy that translates them. And without the empathy, the data that you have simply stays abstract. It's easy to analyze, yes, but it's also easy to ignore. And the empathy is what makes it real, what makes that data, what makes those insights real. It makes you feel it. And it's that feeling that creates an urgency. It's that feeling that motivates people to act and that sparks new ideas. So, in essence, it's the empathy that creates the movement. And it might sound a bit fluffy, but this isn't just a soft idea. The impact is truly measurable. So we see that brands that systemically cultivate empathy, they see measurable returns. They are 60% more profitable, they grow 1.4 times faster, and they realize a 1.6 times higher customer lifetime value. And the good news is empathy is not fixed. No, empathy can grow. Social neuroscientist Professor Jamil Zaki, he showed that we can actually train our empathy muscles. And it's a skill, we can build it, we can strengthen it, and even scale it. So, which means that the very thing that's under pressure today can actually become a real strategic advantage tomorrow. And if empathy is a strategic advantage, how does it become embedded inside an organization? Well, the organizations, they don't succeed overnight, right? They don't implement empathy overnight. They build it layer by layer until it becomes part of how the decisions are being made every day. It often starts very small and then it grows from there. And with that, I'll hand over to Delphine, who will share how you can make this happen.
Yes, thank you, Yulin. So there are different ways for you to grow empathy into your organization, and you can see them here listed on the screen, and I will now take you to each of them a little bit more deeper in the next couple of minutes. So first of all, it starts with the skills. So empathy starts at an individual level. Empathy starts with people. So you need to empower your teams to build the right skills around empathy, around insights. Your people need to learn how to truly listen and how to move beyond those surface level observations and how to turn what they hear into meaningful insights and meaningful actions. Because what you often see at companies is that teams are very much trained to analyze, but not to understand. So they are very data literate, but less empathetic. So, and building empathy as a skill will help you as an organization to close that gap. And that is also what we did for Reckitt when they came to us and they aimed to humanize their insights and to increase the actionability from the insights. And what we did is that we built together with the team a global training program. It was a hybrid program, so combining online and offline sessions. And we trained more than 250 CMI professionals and marketeers around the importance of human centricity, around the role of insights in that, and how you can drive action from insights. And what worked very well in that approach is that we linked the training and the theory to real business challenges. So we immersed the teams in consumer stories from the Reckitt reality, and we immediately applied what we learned in the theory to live cases from the Reckitt environment. So instead of learning what makes a good insight in isolation, we started to build fresh insights for the Reckitt brand and the Reckitt context. And what you see over time is that things start to shift. People, not only the insights became less abstract, but you also see that you start creating a shared language around insights and how you can fuel the business from insights. And also teams start to feel more confident to turn understanding into actions. The second thing that is important is not only upskilling your teams on how to build a good insight, because that's in fact only the beginning. The biggest challenge is to also make sure that your insight lands, that it spreads through the organization, because empathy can only have impact if it flows through the organization. And you see that companies that do that successfully, that they translate their insights into formats that people can engage with, that they can get excited about. So they really create an experience around the insights. And that can come in many forms. So if you need to reach a large audience, you can think of infographics or poster campaign or video stories. For your workshops, you can consider more immersive or more interactive formats, such as creating a consumer museum to immerse in, or a quiz exposing the say-do gap for your stakeholders. You can also think of board games, or even AI immersive experiences to bring to life your insights. You can also consider providing an empathy artifact, a goodie bag, to extend the memory and the impact of your insights. And what all these formats have in common is that they are curated with intent and an audience in mind, and that makes them flow faster and better into the organization. And curating stories is also what we do for Coca-Cola. We are a strategic partner to the CMI team in the US, and we team up with CMI to translate complex research data and other data sources in compelling stories tailored to different audiences. And as a result of that, you can see that insights start to fuel conversations, that they inspire teams, and that they even help to strengthen partner collaborations for Coca-Cola. And a good example of that is what Coca-Cola did for CinemaCon. CinemaCon is the world's largest gathering of theater owners, and Coca-Cola is a sponsor of that event. And as a sponsor, they were asked to create and to host an educational webinar. So we teamed up with the CMI team, and we transformed cultural trends, consumer data, and other business data into engaging stories and practical strategies on how to drive traffic for Gen Z moviegoers. And as such, Coca-Cola was not only able to demonstrate its expertise and partnership within the industry, we were also able to close the gap between moviegoers and theater owners. So if we succeed in not only upskilling our teams to build the right insight, and if we also make sure that the insight lands in the organization, a third thing that we should invest in is making sure that the insights becomes lived, that it is deepened through experience, because empathy, it deepens through experience. So because understanding your consumer from a distance is not the same as immersing in the consumer reality, as stepping into the shoes of your consumer. You need to see their environments yourself. You need to observe their habits and listen to their stories firsthand. And you need to do that because in those immersive moments, you see that that your insight gets texture, that it gets color, that it gets nuance, and that it's harder to stereotype your consumers or to reduce them to one data point. And for that, to deepen your empathy, we organize consumer immersions and cultural immersions. Consumer immersions will give you more insight in the lived reality of everyday choices. Cultural immersions will give you a view on the broader currents that are shaping behavior. And it is in those immersive moments, through immersing in those worlds, that that things become more embodied, that your consumer feels more human again, and that fresh and bold ideas can emerge. Fresh and bold ideas is also what we needed when we organized our offline immersive shopper safari for Samsung Home Electronics in the US. And that was prior to an ideation on how to improve the retail safari for Samsung. So what we did was we organized a full day with the team that we kicked off with a briefing on the challenge at hand, making the retail experience more experiential. We also did a download of insights work that we did, of journey mapping work that we did. And then we tasked the teams to go out in the streets of Manhattan, in New York, and to visit a couple of stores, retailers from out of that category, to really open up the chakras, to inspire out of the box thinking by immersing themselves into different retail environments, experiencing themselves how other retailers are creating meaningful experiences for their consumers and helping them to navigate complexity and make decisions in store. By doing so, we collected more than 250 observations throughout the morning. So things that really inspired, that the teams found striking, and we collected all those observations. Early afternoon, we mapped them on an experience framework, and that was then the input for an ideation session. And by the end of the day, we had more than 80 out-of-the-box fresh ideas on how to future-proof the retail strategy for Samsung. We also asked the teams to pitch their best ideas to get to some kind of prioritization on how to move forward. And this is a case where we mainly connected client-facing teams with the consumers, but it's not only important for those teams very close to consumers and to your audiences, it's equally or even more important for those audiences that are further away from the consumers, such as R&D teams, digital teams, even leadership. And that's why we connected for Haleon, that's the world leader in consumer health, so working on brands like Excedrin, Voltaren, and many more. We connected their innovation teams with consumers and healthcare professionals across the globe, across their key markets over the course of 15 weeks. And we also trained the teams. We made sure that they were confident and equipped to talk to consumers, to get the most out of the time that they spent with the consumers. And after those 15 weeks, we regrouped and we downloaded all those consumer stories that then were translated in emotional springboards for future ideation and for more human-centric innovation. And what you will see over time is that if you have built the right skills, if you have make sure that the insights land in the organization, and if you also make sure that your insights come to life, that they have texture and body, you will see that things start to shift, that empathy will start to shape everyday decisions. People will start to ask different questions. They will challenge assumptions more, and you will see that empathy shifts from something that you do from time to time to something that comes really embedded and that starts to fuel everyday thinking across teams, across seniority levels. And that's also the moment when empathy will become something that needs no longer activation. It will be no longer dependent on individuals or isolated initiatives. No, it will sustain through structures, through rituals that are built around empathy. Empathy will become embedded in your workflows, in your business processes. It will become part of who you are as an organization. It will be part of your DNA. And that is also what happened to L'Oréal when they launched their Global Consumer Connect program back in 2020. We started working on that, on the program. It's called Beauty Talks. And back in 2020, we were also at the beginning of the pandemic, and that felt an important moment in time for L'Oréal to level up their consumer centricity and to move from understanding to empathy, because it felt even more important than ever to be close to audiences, and that because they are working in very dynamic and ever-evolving beauty categories. And now I would like to introduce you to the program by showing a short promo video that we also created to boost awareness and excitement around the program with the L'Oréal stakeholders across the globe. Let's have a look. Yes, and it is through that continuous sensing and through keeping finger on the pulse and embedding empathy into your workflows and into your business processes that empathy also becomes a strategic capability. And that is something that also your teams and internal stakeholders will start to notice. They will see the impact and the value of the program. And that is also something that we saw reflected in the most recent impact survey that we did for the program. So we have in the meantime more than 4,000 stakeholders onboarded, and we asked them on the impact of empathy for the organization. And I think we can say with a score of 8.5 out of 10 that L'Oréal teams across the globe, that they recognize that empathy has become instrumental in driving growth, instrumental in business success. And although we use AI and technology to scale empathy and to accelerate the activation of the program, what we see is that the real magic happens in the fact that we put internal stakeholders in direct contact with their key audiences. And whether you do that through digital connects or through more offline immersive events like you see here pictured on the screen around strategic themes like sustainability or silvers, for instance, or even makeup looks for festivals, it is in that human-to-human connection that the magic happens, that people start to get excited around insights, that they start to see the need and the urge to take action and to drive positive change.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's this. So, in order to move people with your brand, you have to be moved by them first, and not just moved by their data, but by their reality, their emotions, and their everyday lives. Now, how do you do this? One part of the answer is sensing. You don't need another snapshot of your consumer. No, you need that continuous sensing of what's happening in people's lives, in the culture around them. It means keeping your antenna up, staying open, and simply paying attention. So, continuously tuning into what people feel, need, and experience. And it means also training your empathy muscle, and not once or twice a year, but continuously. Really make it a habit. And this can start with small steps, so like setting up Consumer Connect sessions, and it can also grow into a full program over time. And as Miralda Derks from L'Oréal puts it, sensing consumers, getting in touch with their emotions enables us to deepen the relationship between our brands and our consumers. A second element is humanizing. We've all invested heavily in AI, in automation, in dashboards, but without that human context, it's easy to accept everything that AI tells us and without even questioning it, and also without seeing what's missing from that. And humanizing, that's really the antidote to that. So it's about adding color to the data, it's about seeing the stories that are behind the numbers. So rather than relying only on small and fragmented pieces of research, think about how to bring in a deeper and more foundational understanding of your consumer. Because when brands start humanizing, there's something that shifts. One of our clients that we saw also in the L'Oreal video, he puts it very simply. It brings us back to earth, back to what really matters, back to real life, beyond slides, dashboards, and beyond our assumptions.
Okay, thank you, Jolien and Delphine, for sharing this presentation today and making this session a really nice one and very inspirational. Now, before we jump into your questions, we would really appreciate a little bit of feedback. So you see a QR code on the screen. If you have your phone close by, we would love you to scan it and answer 3 short questions. If everything goes right, you should also see a pop-up on the screen where you can find the same survey link to go to those 3 questions. Your feedback will really help us to improve these sessions and of course also shape any further additions. So thank you in advance for taking the time. Now let's have a look if there are any questions here in the chat.
Not really questions.
Maybe one from Felix. Maybe this one is more for you, Delphine, but we shared a lot of B2C examples, really connecting with the end consumer, people that are using products and services. Is it also possible to install this type of consumer connects or the empathy building activities with B2B brands? Is that something that's possible, or do we have experience with that?
Yes, of course, it's possible. It's about connecting your internal stakeholders with their key audiences, and if that is a B2B audience, that's of course very relevant. And in fact we do that by also connecting, for instance, in the L'Oréal example or in the Haleon example, we connect also stakeholders with healthcare professionals, for instance, or professionals in the beauty industry, which is in fact also a B2B connection. So yes, definitely we can do that as well, and also on more technical topics.
Okay, great. I think just one other mention about an experience framework. That's a rather theoretical framework from the experience economy that contains of 4 quadrants. But in the follow-up of this webinar, we will send you our empathy casebook. There you will find the full Samsung case, and you also have a link there to this framework, so you can dive into that. Let me see. There's nothing else I can see. So I would say thank you again for joining us today. If you would still have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and have a nice rest of your day. Thank you.